I know you are aware is the Good morning, everyone. I want to thank the great people of the state of Virginia for organizing a series of events commemorating the 400-year anniversary of the arrival of enslaved Africans. I want to thank all of the community and elected leaders here for your invitation to participate on behalf of the 55-member-strong Congressional Black Caucus. This is the largest number of African Americans ever elected to Congress. And in Congress, CBC members hold major positions of leadership and have accomplished significant change through legislative victories. One of the most significant legislative victories of the year was accomplished by your own representative, Representative Bobby Scott, who, by the way, I know you are aware is the chair of one of the most important committees in Congress, the committee governing the nation's education system. He led and is leading the effort to raise the nation's national minimum wage. Let me acknowledge another member of the Congressional Black Caucus who is in the audience with us today, Representative Lacey Clay from the great state of Missouri. So today we commemorate the anniversary of the arrival here of Africans, but earlier this month, a delegation of members of the Congressional Black Caucus, led by Speaker Nancy Pelosi, traveled to Ghana, West Africa, to pay homage to our ancestors and to visit where they were held captive before they began that horror-filled journey. Before they were captured, they lived in villages with sophisticated levels of organization. Many were skilled craftsmen, farmers, healers, and leaders. They were first taken from villages and forced to walk hundreds of miles to dungeons. Our delegation visited these dungeons that look like the old European forts common in many parts of the world. The two dungeons we visited are called Elmina and Cape Coast. Ironically, they are in a beautiful part of the country, right on the beach. It was a solemn and emotional experience to enter the dungeon, to close our eyes and imagine what our ancestors experienced. An added challenge we all faced was the mystery of knowing that our ancestors were held captive there, but that we had no knowledge of who they were. Captured Africans were stripped of their languages, ethnic identities, tribal and family ties. We saw the areas of the dungeons that were large enough to hold about 50 to 100 people, but where hundreds were held, rooms without sunlight, forced to lay in their own excrement, no access to water to bathe, only given enough food and water to keep them alive, but deliberately kept in a weakened state so they could not organize or resist. Those that did attempt to resist were mutilated and left in separate rooms and slowly starved to death. Females were routinely made to stand in line while their captors would choose one of them. She was then washed and led up a staircase to a bedroom where she was raped and then returned back. The men, women, and children were held in the dungeons for months, awaiting the time they would be forced onto boats to begin a journey that lasted for months. We have all seen the drawings of hundreds of people stuffed onto ships and heard the stories of what happened during their journey. When individuals became too sick or died, or women gave birth, they were then thrown overboard the ship to the sharks who followed along. The ones that survived here only to live out the rest of their lives as property in captivity. It is difficult to believe that this level of brutality lasted for hundreds of years and affected millions of Africans. But when we stood in the dungeons filled with sadness, our heads lowered, reliving or trying to imagine what they went through, at the very same time, we lifted our heads and our chests were filled with pride and amazement at the strength and resilience of our ancestors. And here we are today on what can be described as hallowed ground in our nation's history. But I would guess that most of the nation doesn't even know the story of the hallowed ground we stand on today. That we would arrive here first, and generations later would escape enslavement and seek protection right here. That the nation's first African-American president would make Fort Monroe his first designation for a national monument. From enslaved ancestors to Mayor Tuck and Vice Mayor Gray, that in spite of 250 years of enslavement, there would be 57 African Americans in Congress representing all of America. I only wish the entire nation could witness what you are doing here today, the history of Fort Monroe, how you have honestly acknowledged all of our nation's history, not just the parts that make us feel good, but the difficult parts as well. And I can't tell you what it feels like for me to sit here. This is my first time here, but the emotion that I feel in listening to the speakers tell the truth. Tell the truth. The sad thing about our nation and why we continue to have the issues we do is because we have denied part of our history. And I believe that if the entire nation could experience, could learn and understand our true and full history, we might not be witnessing the resurrection of hate. Thank you so much for the honor of speaking to you today.